He sat alone on the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the floor like it was the only thing that could understand him. His hands were shaking, not because of the cold, but because of what he had just been told. The words were still echoing in his mind. "You're lucky to be alive." That's what the doctor had said. Calm, professional, like it was just another sentence in another day. But for Daniel, everything stopped. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not after the crash. Not after the broken glass, the twisted metal, the screaming tires, the sound of the world tearing open. But he was. Alive, breathing, and confused. He didn't remember much, just flashes, a phone buzzing, rain on the windshield. His eyes closing for just a second too long. Then the sound, the impact, darkness. Now, this. A room filled with silence. Machines beeping slowly, reminding him that time hadn't stopped, that life somehow had continued. He touched his chest. There was pain, but he could feel it. That meant something. He looked up at the small window. The sky was gray, pale, like it was tired of shining. The kind of sky that doesn't care what happens below it. And Daniel understood that. He didn't care either. Not yet, because up until now his life had been noise, rushing, racing, climbing, always chasing something, money, success, approval. He had worked 16-hour days, missed birthdays, missed dinners, missed saying "I love you" because emails felt more urgent. He had built a career, but not a life. And now, as he sat in that hospital bed with tubes in his arms and guilt in his chest, he wondered, what was it all for? No one had visited. Not yet. His phone lay on the table screen, cracked battery dead. Even if he charged it, who would he call? Who would answer? He closed his eyes, and the silence returned. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud. Filled with everything he hadn't said, everything he hadn't done. He had always thought life was about winning, being better, being faster, being more. But now, he just wanted to go back to one morning, any morning, to say good morning to his mother instead of rushing out, to hug his sister instead of sending a thumbs-up emoji. To tell Sarah, the girl who used to wait for him to come home, that she was enough even when he was too busy to notice her tears. But life didn't rewind. It only moved forward. Unless you didn't. Unless you stopped. Unless something stopped you, like a car, like a crash, like a second that took everything and gave you nothing back except questions. The nurse walked in quietly. She didn't say much, just checked the machines, smiled gently, wrote something down. Then she looked at him and said, "You're lucky." He nodded because that's what people do when they don't know how to answer. She paused at the door. "Do you want me to call someone?" Daniel thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, thank you." She nodded and left. He leaned back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. It was white, plain, like a blank page. And maybe that's what this was. A page, a new one, waiting to be written. But with what he had no idea. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "What now?" And for the first time in his life, he didn't have an answer, not even a plan. Just a heart that had been too quiet for too long. Now beating, slowly but clearly. Would you like me to continue with the next 1,000+ word segment of this story? Banjan Noi, continue ChatGPT Jane Noi, of course. Here is the next immersive 1,000+ word segment of the cinematic voiceover script titled The Story That Changed His Life Forever. Learn English through emotion. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room without asking. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't light the whole world on fire. It just came through the blinds, thin and soft, like a reminder that the world was still turning. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he moved, and the ache in his ribs reminded him. Right. The hospital, the accident, the second chance. He sat up slower this time. The nurse had left breakfast on the tray beside him. Dry toast, scrambled eggs, and tea. He wasn't hungry, but he picked up the cup anyway. It was warm, familiar. He held it for a long time without drinking. That's when he noticed the notebook. It was on the small table near the window. New, closed, a pen tucked inside. He frowned. He hadn't seen it before. Curious, he reached for it. There was a note taped to the front cover in careful handwriting. For when the questions get too loud. There was no name, no explanation. He opened the notebook. The first page was blank. So was the second. But on the third, someone had written, "You don't need to have the answers. Just start with the truth." He stared at the page. His fingers hovered over the pen. For a while, he did nothing. Then, with a quiet breath, he wrote, "I don't know who I am without the noise." He stopped, looked at the words, then kept going. "I've been running for so long. I don't know what standing still feels like." He filled the page slowly, not with perfect sentences, not with poetry, just truth, memories, regrets, moments he missed, the time he forgot his mom's birthday, the time Sarah cried in the kitchen and he didn't stop typing, the time he promised to rest but chose one more meeting instead, the time he lied and said everything's fine. He wrote it all down. And somehow it helped. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with honesty. That afternoon, the doctor came in to check on him. "Physically, you're doing well," he said. "You'll be discharged by the end of the week." Daniel nodded, but he didn't smile. Because well didn't mean whole. "Do you remember what happened?" the doctor asked. Daniel looked at him. "I fell asleep at the wheel." The doctor nodded. "You were lucky," he said again. "It could have been much worse." Daniel looked away. "I think it already was." He was discharged on a Friday. He walked out of the hospital with a small bag, the notebook in one hand, and the coin they found in his pocket in the other. He didn't go home. He didn't even know where home was anymore. His apartment was still there. His emails were still waiting. But he wasn't ready. So he went to the only place that felt like it might understand silence. The sea. It was 3 hours away. He rented a small cabin by the coast with a single bed and no TV. And for 3 days he sat by the shore and listened. To the waves, to the wind, to himself. He walked along the sand with bare feet and pockets full of guilt. He watched couples laugh. He watched kids run into the water. He watched the sun set without a phone in his hand. And for the first time in years, he felt something strange. Stillness. It didn't feel empty. It felt honest. On the fourth morning, he took the notebook and walked to a small cafe near the beach. He sat by the window, ordered black coffee, and started writing again. But this time, not just about the past. This time he wrote, "I don't want to chase anymore. I want to create. I don't want to impress. I want to connect. I don't want to just live. I want to feel alive." He didn't know what that would look like. But he knew what it wouldn't look like. It wouldn't look like 20 emails before breakfast. It wouldn't look like canceling plans to take more meetings. It wouldn't look like pretending to be fine when he was breaking inside. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he walked to a quiet bench overlooking the water. and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. His phone rang 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" He froze, then said, "Hi, Mom." A pause, then a breath. "Daniel." "Yeah." Another pause, and then tears in her voice. "Oh my God. I thought I didn't know if I'm okay," he said. More silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," she said. "Just come home." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I will." He stayed on the bench long after the call ended. The sky was dark now, but he wasn't afraid of it anymore. Because now he was writing a new story. Not about success, not about image, not about noise, but about presence, about love, about slowing down enough to hear his own heartbeat and to listen when someone else spoke. That night, he wrote one sentence on a clean page in his notebook. "This is the story that changed my life forever." And under it, in smaller letters, "Because for the first time, I finally started living it." Daniel arrived at his mother's house on a quiet Sunday morning. He didn't bring much, just a small backpack, the notebook, and a folded letter he had written, but wasn't sure he would give her. The house looked the same. The chipped paint on the mailbox, the wind chimes on the porch, the garden that used to overflow with flowers, but now looked tired, like it had been waiting too long for someone to come back. He stood at the front door for a moment, his hand resting on the frame. Then it opened before he could knock. His mother stood there, smaller than he remembered, more lines on her face. But her eyes were exactly the same soft searching, full of love and worry. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she opened her arms. He stepped forward and fell into them like a child who had been away too long. No words, just warmth, just forgiveness without being asked. They sat at the kitchen table just like they used to. 2 cups of tea, toast with too much butter. Silence that didn't hurt anymore. She didn't ask questions right away. She didn't talk about the accident or the time he'd been gone. She simply said, "I'm glad you're here." And that was enough. Over the next few days, Daniel began helping around the house. He fixed the back fence, trimmed the wild bushes, replanted the flowers. Each small task felt like a step back to something real, something grounded. One morning while cleaning the attic, he found an old box of drawings. His, from when he was a boy. Dragons, mountains, stories in colors. He used to draw every day. He had even dreamed of becoming an illustrator once. But somewhere along the way, deadlines replaced daydreams. Schedules replaced sketches. He stared at the pictures for a long time, running his fingers over the faded pencil lines. Then he brought the box downstairs. His mother smiled when she saw it. "You were always creating," she said, "even when you didn't know what it meant." He stayed up late that night sketching again for the first time in years. The lines were shaky. The shapes weren't perfect. But the feeling was there, and that was enough. He began drawing every morning, just a little, before the world had a chance to distract him. And the more he drew, the more he began to remember who he was before the world told him who he should be. One afternoon, he walked into a local bookstore, the same one he used to visit in high school, and asked if they had a bulletin board. They did. He pinned one of his sketches there with a note looking to collaborate on a children's story. Just for fun, just for heart. Contact Daniel. He didn't expect much. But 2 days later, he got an email. A local teacher had seen his note. She wrote short stories for her students and wanted to bring them to life. They met for coffee, talked for hours. It wasn't a business deal. It was a beginning. A creative spark, a shared purpose. Soon they were meeting every week, sharing ideas, laughing, building something neither of them had expected. It started as a hobby. But hobbies, when fueled by love, have a way of becoming more. One of their short stories was published in the school's magazine. Then another was read aloud in class. Children smiled, laughed, asked for more. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt useful, not in the way that earned money or awards, but in the way that touched people. And that felt better than any paycheck ever had. One evening, sitting at his desk, surrounded by pencils and paper and early drafts, Daniel picked up his notebook again. He turned to a fresh page and wrote, "You don't always have to change the world. Sometimes it's enough to change one day for one person. And under it, that's how you change everything." He didn't erase the past. He didn't forget the crash, the hospital, the months he spent chasing things that never filled him. But now he was writing something new, not just on the page, in his life. Autumn faded into winter. The wind carried leaves across the streets like memories brushing against Daniel's coat as he walked through the town square. He passed the coffee shop where he used to work on his laptop, chasing deadlines and ignoring the world outside the window. Now he simply watched people pass, watched the steam rise from his cup, watched the light dance across faces he didn't know but suddenly felt connected to. One afternoon, he saw a father and daughter sitting across from each other at a wooden table. She was showing him her drawing, proudly, pointing at the sun. The house, the stick figures with big smiles. The father laughed and kissed her forehead. Daniel smiled, and for a moment he wished he could go back and draw with his younger self. Tell him don't forget this part. Don't forget how it feels to create something just because it makes you happy. He walked to the library later that day. He had started volunteering there on weekends, helping kids choose books, leading story time, sometimes just listening. He didn't do it for a reason. He just liked the quiet joy of it. The way a child's eyes lit up when a character said something funny. The way a shy boy slowly started reading aloud. The way people softened when someone gave them time. One Saturday, the librarian handed him a flyer. "Thought you might want to see this," she said. It was a call for submissions, children's book authors and illustrators. A small local publisher was accepting new voices. Stories that felt real. Stories that helped kids feel seen. Daniel looked at the paper for a long time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his sketchbook. He didn't feel afraid, not anymore. He knew he might not be chosen. He knew it might not go anywhere. But that didn't matter. Because what he had already found was bigger than publication. He had found meaning. He had found connection. He had found himself. And so, one quiet night, he and the teacher-turned-co-author sat across from each other, surrounded by drafts, drawings, and coffee mugs with faded quotes. Together, they submitted their first book. A story about a boy who couldn't sleep because the world was too loud, but who found peace in the small things. A dog's breath, a star through the window, a hug from someone who stayed. They titled it, "Even When It's Loud, You're Safe Here." Weeks passed. Then came an email, simple, plain, but with one sentence that made Daniel stop breathing for a second. "We'd love to publish your story." He sat in silence. Not the heavy silence of the hospital. Not the silence of regret. But the kind that feels like standing at the top of a mountain. No noise. Just space to breathe. He whispered to himself, "This is it. Not success, not fame, not winning. Just this feeling I'm finally doing something that matters." When the book was printed, he held the first copy in his hands, like it was made of glass and memory. He gave the second copy to his mother. The third to a boy in the library who once said, "Books make the world feel softer." And the fourth he left at the hospital in the waiting room, with a note inside to anyone who thinks they're broken: you're not. You're just becoming. That night, Daniel sat by his window once more, a candle flickering beside him, snow gently falling outside. He opened his notebook, the same one he found in the hospital. The last page was still blank. He wrote, "The crash didn't ruin my life. It returned it to me." And below that, this was the story that changed everything. Not because it was perfect, but because I finally chose to live it. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and smiled, not because everything was easy now, but because everything was real. And that at last was enough.